So yes, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll quickly introduce our speakers. They are hopefully already very familiar to you, Margie Thorsborne and Joe Brummer. Joe has been dedicated to the field of trauma-informed restorative practices and restorative justice for over 17 years, and he's facilitated hundreds of circles, mediations, community conferences, has trained thousands of individuals, including educators, parents, workplace professionals, volunteers, community members, lots of different people. He's also a member of the adjunct faculty at Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, where he teaches the course Peacebuilding Skills, Dialogue, Trauma and Restorative Justice. Um, Marge is an author, a trainer, and a facilitator of restorative practice with a background in education and counselling. She was a pioneer of restorative practice in schools in Australia and New Zealand and in the UK throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And she's also since trained loads of practitioners, change makers across different sectors, so in education, workplaces, community, police, lots of different sectors. She's still involved in this work in schools, particularly around whole school implementation of trauma-informed relational approaches and culture. And of course, they have both written this fabulous book, Becoming a Trauma-Informed Restorative Educator, which they'll be speaking on today. I'm just going to put the link to their book in the chat so that if you're interested after hearing a hint of it today, you can go away and buy their book and read the whole thing. And yeah, share it with your teams and think more about how you could use this in your own work and practice. So without further ado, I think I'm going to hand over to Marge and yes, please take it away. Lovely to have you here today.
Thank you, Joy. And before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are all gathered today, wherever you may be, and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to let you know that it's close to my bedtime here in Australia, but Joe has just got out of bed and he has a little coffee drip happening, I think, at the moment, to keep him awake. And so I offered to kind of start the ball rolling. But I really wanted to say up front that Joe and I have very different backgrounds. You know, he's in social work, mine's in education, but I think we're both educators, really, of big people and little people and everyone around us. And we have a very limited time to kind of introduce you to this extraordinary book, which we managed to finally get printed sometime in last year, in the middle of 2024. And I think what I wanted to say straight up before I hand over to Joe is that Joe has a previous book, which is about building a trauma-informed restorative school, which I sort of rode shotgun a bit with. And then when the publishers were happy with what progress that book made, they came back to us and said, where's the next one? So Joe and I had a pretty good reason for writing the next one, although it was like giving birth to an elephant, really. It was really very, very, very difficult. So, Joe, talk about why we bothered to go to the trouble of doing this book.
The publisher made us.
Nice try.
Honestly, but I think also, this second book really has a message about, we've done the same thing ineffectively for decades because our approach to children was based in old school psychology that current neuroscience didn't seem to agree with anymore. Like the neuroscience wasn't backing up the psychology that we've worked from for decades. And so I think this new book was really about trying to apply current neuroscience, what we know about the brain, what we know about behavior, from a neuroscience perspective, to sort of help children, actually, no, help adults, you know, interact with children in a completely different way. And so that's probably a great place for us to just dive in. And
Yeah.
uh, so one of the things that Marg and I identified, and I will say, giving birth to an elephant's probably the first time I've heard Marg say that, but it sounds so true. Like, we had such a hard time writing this book, mostly because when we first started, we weren't sure what we were writing, and there are just both of us suffered a little bit from writer's block, because I think, again, we weren't sure we knew what we wanted to say. We just didn't know how to get going on saying it. But one thing we agreed on, really early on, was that becoming trauma informed, becoming restorative, are not about what you do, but more about what you become. Like, you don't do restorative justice work. You don't do trauma informed. You literally become it. And so that's a journey. And Mark and I talked about our own journeys, and then the journey of writing this book. I think I can definitely speak for both of us. This was a learning experience. Like, in order to write this book, we had to spend. I think each of us probably spent about $1,000, euro or otherwise, um, to just keep buying the books that would fuel current information. So we were using the most current information. And it felt like, as fast as we could read new material, there was new material coming out. Like, brain science has been exploding lately. But we definitely agree this is a personal journey. Like, to really do this, you have to take on reading the books, listening to the podcasts, reading the journals, showing up at the conferences, and just diving in to learning this work. And then you got to kind of bring this to apply this to education, bring this into the classroom, bring it into what you do on a day-to-day basis. And then this acknowledgement that there are some systemic things going on in our worlds that we need to change. And so part of this is also this social justice journey of rectifying what is going on in our systems that treat some people differently than we treat other people. And when it comes to education, especially when it comes to the ideas of inclusion, kids who have neurodivergence, kids that have struggles with trauma, we need to start applying this in a way that kids don't get left behind. And so this is a journey. It has no destination. It has no end game. It is just a continuation of constantly learning and
Mm.
um, and reading. And I have to say, in the past 2 years since writing this book, I've read more books than I've probably ever read in my life. And so just the reminder of how important it is that you can't just go to a training for 3 hours and be like, I'm trauma informed. Like, no, you're not. Like, there's work to be done. And that biggest part of that personal journey is looking at your own trauma, looking at your own stuff so that you can address your own nervous system. Um,
And
I don't
Joe,
know
one of
what,
the things, one
yeah.
of the things that one of the messages, especially from Laurie de Saltels in Indiana, I think, is that we have to befriend our own nervous systems. And so, in the writing of the book at my vast age, which is in the outer edge of middle age these days, the personal journey has been extraordinary. I mean, professionally, you and I are both across a whole pile of stuff, as most of the people who are here today, no matter what the sort of space or field they work in. But we have no hope unless we understand ourselves first. Adults have to go first. And going back to why the writing, aside from the publisher being on our backs for the next book, is really that both of us have come to understand that schools that claim to be trauma informed are probably not. It doesn't qualify if you've had 3 hours of PD. That doesn't change a thing in the way your own brain works. But trauma-informed schools, some are still, and quite a few, are still working with old-fashioned behaviourism. So that you can't really do either of those things without the symbiosis with the other. So how do we knit together the business of being restorative and being trauma-informed at the same time? And I think actually we've done a pretty good job of it. But Jo, do you just want to flick to, the few comments that, and we could bang on for hours, but we can't. We could, but we won't, about motivation, which is the business of behaviorism versus self-determination theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to start on this one or should I?
No, you go.
So, when writing this book, and that's probably just a great place to start, is let's talk about how this book came into life. Marg wrote the first chapter. Like the first chapter to actually get put on paper was not coming from me because my writer's block was just terrible. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know what we're writing. And what are we trying to say? I felt personally like when we wrote the first book, like I felt like that's what I had to say. And I wasn't sure I had another book in me. And then Marg wrote the first chapter and sent it to me. And I was like, oh my God, we're going to write the best book ever. Because Marg wrote a great chapter, and it was actually the title of it, a starting point, some theory, concepts, and definitions. And she went on to just tear apart behaviorism, which nothing makes me giddier and more happy than people tearing apart good old B.F. Skinner, Watson, Pavlov. I will give these people credit at the time that they came up with their theories. That was groundbreaking and still wrong. And here's why. A lot of that thinking made sense at the time, although we should have all had a big red flag when Skinner and Watson did all their experiments on pigeons and rats, and then suddenly applied all that learning to humans. Well, humans are way more complex in our behavior, our thinking. Everything about us is more complex than rats and pigeons. And so we should have been worried right there, but we weren't. But basically, behaviorism is, the basics of behaviorism are accurate. Classical conditioning, which is simply neuroplasticity, our brain's ability to adapt to our environment. We're constantly learning and adapting to what goes on around us. But then they went a bit further with behaviorism and said something called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning essentially is trying to manipulate classical conditioning to get the desired behaviors that we want. If you want more of a behavior, reward it. If you want less of it, punish it. Except one, some of their methods were cruel, if not most of them. And two, it always relied on external sources for mediation, for motivation. And the problem with that is the assumption that all behavior is externally motivated, which is what behaviorism believed. Behaviorism also believed that all behavior is a choice. But neuroscience came along and said, yeah, that's not quite true. And so the interplay is between, is behaviorism really how people operate, or is there something else? And so Marg and I both agree with something called self-determination theory. Ryan and DC, two amazing researchers, not only because their psychology fits with neuroscience, like what we know about how the brain works, that our brains love agency. We love to do things on our own and on our own terms. We like to get better at stuff. Like why play a guitar or a piano if like what's the reward in this other than it's kind of fun, but we also get better the more we do it. And so we crave things we can get better at. And when we don't get better, we get frustrated. But learning in general is human. We like to learn. We like to get better at stuff. We like to have our own choices about stuff. But more importantly, when that stuff's relevant to us, like we're connected to it. And these are the things that motivate us internally. Behaviorism believes that everything about your motivation is external. But if you're a Maslow fan, the basic hierarchy of needs, you can't have you can't have both. Either you're a Maslow fan and all behavior is driven by needs, or you're a behaviorism fan and everything's driven by, the avoidance of pain and the seeking of pleasure. But you can't have both. And so, we really need to have this better understanding about what motivates our children, what motivates humans, so that we can actually teach them better and understand human behavior better. And
Yeah.
so,
So, yeah, Joe, if I can just sort of add to this too, there's one other thing about this behaviorism stuff, and Skinner was very clear about, and that was that it was all about compliance because it made life easier.
yeah,
So with the other driven motivation, it's do this and you get that, which are the rewards and punishments. But there's nothing in there around doing it for the love of it, or doing it for that sense of competency, or doing it because I've made sort of I've been given some sort of choice about what I want to do with it. So for me, it's always about the clarity of understanding that much of our entire education system, and probably workplaces as well, is driven by the need for people to conform. We want them to be obedient. Now, there's nothing wrong with having people who are cooperative and collaborative, but to be obedient for the sake of making life easier for an adult. There's another lovely book that I read some years ago, but I reread again with this big reading thing that we had to do, is written by an Australian psychologist called Robin Grill, and he's written a book called Parenting for a Peaceful World. What it really is a history of childhood and how we have changed over the centuries, from infanticide not even being a crime through to the kind of Maslow approach of meeting kids' biological needs. So to me, it's really about trying to simplify these messages around motivation, understanding the history behind it, instead of just sucking it up and thinking that it's always been this way. It hasn't. We are in a constant state of social evolution. And I think we're sort of moving out of a compliance-driven space. And I get really, really frustrated when systems and policies in schools, in particular, are called behaviour management policies. What I want is behaviour development policies. I want, positive climate for learning, not positive behaviour for learning. And to understand that as adults, our job is to help develop a set of skills that we're wired for, actually, and that is to connect and belong, because we're warm-blooded, hairy mammals. But so much of what we do in schools around this kind of compliance-driven approach is incredibly transactional. And it doesn't, and at least what we do know, for those of you who are restorative practitioners, and I'm sure most of you are, who are here with us tonight, that this well-done relational approach to problem solving is deeply transformative. It changes people's brains. It motivates them to do something different because they want to repair the rupture that's happened. But when I think about the silliness of detentions and the silliness of not allowing, a really disadvantaged kid whose social skills aren't well developed, that, they've annoyed a teacher somewhere along the line, broken a rule, and therefore you can't go on this one trip that the school is providing, which might bring you some joy and some engagement in learning. So the thing that's been the greatest joy to me in working with Joe and writing the book is been about understanding that while we always knew restorative was a really appropriate approach, a relational approach to problem solving, now we have the neuroscience to back it up. And that's just inspirational. So Joe, so we don't, just let's keep going. And I want you to talk really about the brain and prediction, because this is central to understanding kids' behaviour, or our own behaviour for that matter.
Yeah, that's a great segue. So, if behaviorism isn't how humans function, then that begs the question, well, how do we function? And so it starts off with, we have tended to believe, and behaviorism taught us, that we are stimulus response creatures. The Pavlov's dog, you ring a bell, dog salivates. It's a response. And the fact of the matter is that made sense to believe for a long time. And then neuroscience came along and looked at how the brain actually worked and said, yeah, that's not how it works. And what actually is how it works is, rather than your brain being stimulus response, your brain predicts the world. In other words, your brain's one step ahead of you all the time. And it's not responding, it's predicting. And it uses three pieces of information to do that. The first one is sensory input from the outside world, your five senses. And then it's your inside senses, what we know is called interoception. Did you sleep? Are you hungry? Do you need to use the restroom? Are you, what's going on inside your body? And then your brain compares that information with the only other piece of information it has to go with, past experience. I mean, your brain's living in this dark box inside your brain, and only can rely on the data that comes in from the outside world and the inside world, compares it to what we already know to determine what do we think is about to happen. And your brain does this because of this amazing thing called the body budget, which is a concept developed by a woman named Lisa Feldman Barrett, whose work around emotions and the construction of emotions says that, what our brain's basic main job is to manage metabolically our resources. And by resources, I don't mean like money, like a budget, but a budget filled with all the qualities and things that make your body work. salt, sugar, glucose, saline, serotonin, oxytocin, glycogen, minerals, like whether or not you have the right vitamins going. Your body is trying to figure out in any given moment, how many resources do I have and what will I need to do with them? And so when stress comes along, we tend to call it the stress response, but it's not really a response, it's a prediction. When you go into fight or flight, your body's not responding to something that happened. It's preparing for what it thinks will happen. Well, that's a pretty different way of looking at the world. When we look at people as stress response and responding to the world, like Pavlov said, well, then everything sort of, we're literally just reacting to stuff, but your brain isn't lying awake. It's not sitting around dormant, waiting for something to wake it up. Your brain's on fire all the time, actively like processing the world. And so your brain like is trying to figure out what's coming and how can I manage my resources to to be ready for that. How much energy do I need to hold this mug full of awesome coffee in the morning? Like your brain isn't worried about what already happened. Your brain's worried about what's going to happen, which is Joe needs more caffeine. Um, and so what your body's seeking is allostasis. Can I use my resources in the most metabolically efficient way? Every time you have a deposit into the body budget, your body's thrilled. You got food, sleep, um, hugs, and love. Or did you get a bunch of withdrawals? Trauma is a withdrawal. Depression, a bankrupted body budget. Like the more we keep pulling away from the budget, the more of a deficit we have. And at the end of the day, we call that dysregulation. Because when your body and brain are regulated, it means that things are in balance. Like the body budget's, balanced. And regulated doesn't mean calm. It means that the energy you have matches the task at hand, right? If you got to take an exam, you've got just the right amount of energy to put into that exam. It's not too much, and it's not too little. The energy matches the task. And so, what does that look like in real life, and how does it show up? Well, when we've had too many withdrawals from the body budget, it shows up as behavior. And sometimes that's because your body believes there's a threat. And if your history, because remember, we use those three things to predict the world, past history and senses. If a lot of what I've experienced in my life is negative, my predictions are going to be negative. And so it will show up as classroom behavior. Like fighting looks like fight. Flight looks like flight. And, there are some exceptions to that, but mostly it's pretty obvious when kids are skipping class, getting kicked out of class, that's flight behavior. Something about their nervous system is saying it's not safe to be here.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, can I just in all
yeah,
of that to just remind people, and those of you who do have had, a lot of work around the trauma stuff and how the brain processes data, so that the thing that I'm always keen in our professional development is to teach folks that the brain grows from the bottom up and it grows from the inside out, but it also processes data. So the data from all of our senses, internal, external, and also the data from our experiences are processed to allow us to make some predictions about whether we're safe or whether we are in a space of danger or threat. So if you look back 20 years before we even knew too much, well, I mean, the scientists did, but I don't know whether regular educators understood this stuff, because I certainly didn't 20, 25 years ago. This just looked like non-compliance. but actually it's you know, kids who've had some extraordinary experiences that haven't been all that wonderful, and from the simple smell of someone to the look on their face to just the disturbance of a body that, you know, that's all jiggly and kind of fidgeting, even those sensations are enough to alert our brains that there might be something coming that's not going to be good. And so when our behaviour management policies and protocols deal with this stuff instead of being curious, not furious, being prepared to explore, not explode, and to seek to understand. If we don't do that stuff, we're not teaching kids in any way, shape, or form about their brains or how they might learn to calm themselves down. But that only happens with you know, kind, caring, well-regulated adults. And, you know, I mean, I can remember the number of times when I've lost it in a classroom and had to go back the next day and said, sorry, kids, that was just completely inappropriate, you know, and do you think we could start again? So, yeah, is there anything else? I'm just very aware of the time here, Joe, that you want to talk about that huge list as being symptoms of stuff that data that's being filtered, you know, through the brainstem first before it even gets to the cortex where learning can happen.
Yeah. So I guess the place to go right now is you know, teachers always ask Marg and I, you know, so what do we do? And the first thing is get your own nervous system in check,
Mm,
right? As adults, the more you can befriend your nervous system and stay personally regulated, the more you can share that calm with a young person. And so what does dysregulation look like? Well, we look for um, to regulate our bodies, we need something patterned, rhythmic, and repetitive. So we bounce our foot, we tap our pen, we do all these very patterned, rhythmic, repetitive things to calm ourselves. And so, as an educator, when you read the room, you're looking for patterned, rhythmic, and repetitive stuff. Like the kid that's squiggling, the kid that, you know, has the bouncing leg, the kid that has, you know, just looked like they're not with you anymore.
mm,
And I don't know, we're oversimplifying this for time, and I agree with Mark. I want to have time for questions, but uh, the other thing to really, you know, to know, and you know, when you do restorative justice work or any kind of learning work with children, we have to know the sequence of engaging and processing that our brains use. And we borrow this slide from Dr. Bruce Perry. And basically, when the lower parts of our brain are regulated and your needs are met, you feel safe. You then are able to be relational with other people. So when we don't feel safe, the first thing to go is our relational abilities. The second thing to go is our ability to think straight. That's why when you run around the house trying to find your glasses and can't find them, you freak out. And I know all of you have called a friend with your, you know, you've all been like searching the house for your phone and you call a friend and you're like, have you seen my phone? And you don't realize it's in your hand solely because the thinking part of your brain shuts down. And so, you know, we want people to understand that under stress and duress, we lose our ability to think straight. But
mm,
restorative work, reflective work, getting kids to own their behavior requires that they feel safe and loved. And that's the only way, that's the only path to getting them to be able to reason and reflect. And that's where consequences get processed, that upper part of the brain. And
mm,
so we have to think about, like, how do we create a classroom that can do that? And one of the ways we do that is a regulated classroom. We need a regulated, we need students who are regulated, basic needs are met. We need students who have relationships so they feel like I belong. So I need to be safe, I need to belong, and now I can learn. And then even once you get to that, well, then we need curriculum that actually is also in line with the brain. Curriculum that's relevant, rewarding, and by rewarding, I don't mean externally, I mean internally. It's got to be rhythmic because that's how our brain creates patterns. It's got to be repetitive because we need enough repetitions to learn something. Hearing something once will not create a new neural network. Hearing it twice, 3 times, as many times as Marg and I can say, regulate, relate, reason, so you all walk away from this remembering it, like at the drop of a hat. We need to repeat it. It's also got to be respectful and relational. And I know I'm here in the US where this is like taboo to say, but it's got to be culturally responsive. It's got to be respectful and thoughtful about who someone is and honor their humanity. And it's got to be, everything's got to be done in relationship because we're relational creatures. As Marg always says, we're warm-blooded hairy mammals. So, like, we are designed to be in relationship with each other because we're human. And so
Yeah. And
that sounds
because
like an
actually
awesome place.
we've
Yeah, go
we've
ahead.
we've evolved to be connected with each other. I mean, there's a whole sort of neural wiring with the vagus nerve, with the dorsal vagus and the ventral vagus and the sympathetic nervous system, to handle the sort of crises that we have to face. But we are born to connect. We're wired for it. And if we don't understand the relational biology of our own brains and our own classrooms, then you're caught in the dark ages, and we just look, in some ways it's not rocket science. It's about understanding that for me to help a kid who's dysregulated, that I have to stay calm, that I have to be curious, not furious, that I have to explore rather than explode, that I have to seek to understand. And the business about predictability means that in the schools, and I've read some of the research about UK schools of excellence, that they have this cohesive approach to routines across the school. So it reduces the cognitive load on kids, and that coming to school is predictable. Walking into, Mrs. Green's class is predictable. Walking into Mr. Brummer's class is predictable because both of those two people have agreed on a particular routine. They do it their own way, but they know they're going to be greeted, that it's going to be a radical welcome, whether they're late or they're not late. I was so pleased to see you. How wonderful. I kept you a seat. Aren't you lucky? You know. And it's just learning how our brains work and making sure that we do that in our classrooms and with our families and in the community and the neighbour next door. It's just our biology, really. So I think, Joe, we should really shut up and see if anyone would like to ask us a deeply important question.
Yeah, I feel like we super oversimplified lots of really complex things for y'all, but I'm really curious to know, like, what's going through your head after hearing all this crazy information, some of which contradicts, like, the common knowledge that we've been working from. So I'd love to hear what people are thinking, what questions you have, challenges, throwing some sarcasm, whatever you need. Um, Bring
Yes,
it
feel
on.
free to put questions in the chat and I'll try to monitor that. Otherwise, if you'd like to ask a question via video or audio, please just kind of raise virtual hand, and hopefully I will then see it and come to you.
Yeah. So look, while we're waiting, the other thing I wanted to, or Joe and I wanted to let you know, is that that there are lots of schools all over the world, including a bunch of educators in Spain that we're working with at the moment, who've actually used the book as a book club. And so I just think bringing your interested folk together, to do some deep reading around that, but not all in one. And Joe and I are in the process of creating videos, about half-hour videos that match each of the chapters. So that's been the greatest of fun. And we have a hand up there. So ask away.
Lucy, would you
Miss
like to go
iPhone
first? So
8.
we have a couple of hands up.
Oh, yes. Okay. You manage that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. That was really interesting. I really enjoyed it, and haven't got the book yet, so I'll be ordering that after the session's finished. You mentioned that the approach wouldn't work where there are also behaviourist approaches, or certainly wouldn't be as effective. I'm coming from researching prison education spaces and thinking about how trauma-informed approaches can be used there. Do you think there's a place, or how do those two things work together when, of course, the prison is a behaviourist approach in itself? Is there any way, and actually a lot of the trauma comes from their prior experiences in education, how can that work together, or can it?
Well, look, one of the things, and Joe, please jump in here too. One of the things that Joe and I are both really serious about is right at the beginning of any kind of professional development, working with people to get them to think about what we want a consequence to achieve. Now that brings in issues around responsibility and accountability, which is what restorative stuff is very good at. But we're also very clear that if a consequence is not at least attempting to tackle the problem that's caused the problem, then you're just spinning your wheels in the sand. And, if kids are being educated while they're in prison, they have got to come out being able to understand their own brains, and secondly, to understand the cause and effect, and not cause and effect in terms of rewards and punishments, but what it's like for the other person, and to expose them to this possibility of making things right, because so many of our kids that turn up as challenges have never ever been exposed to the concept of making something right, or responsibility or accountability. So we have some other people. Who's next?
Jane, I think you had your hands up, though I can see you're walking, so if you're happy to still
yeah, I literally just took a second. I just want to write everything down. I've got my pen. Thank you. I just can't get enough information down, and I just find it quite frustrating that I just want to absorb it all in one go. I'm involved in restorative practice with the youth service, but I also am involved with exclusions in schools. And what I find very difficult is that obviously with young people, when they're excluded and I'm running an appeal, how can I use the information to try and support the child who's obviously come from so much trauma? And as you say, lack of consistency, there's been no respect. They don't have the schools don't have the time, basically. It is a behaviourist. I mean, you're absolutely right about the behaviour development approach. But I have to analyse that and put all this together. And my whole thing is, how do I use your information to apply so that I can support that child, bearing in mind it's a system that's already fixed and I'm trying to change it? I mean, it's just like I feel so helpless in this world of RJ that just doesn't apply when a child's being excluded, because it seems as though the school's against the child because they don't want a difficult child to them.
Yeah.
Yes, so you go, because I know you've been writing stuff with youth justice and so on.
Yeah, so I do this work in two different ways. One of my passions is to do this work in schools, and then of course I also am working in youth justice around kids who have been arrested for arrestable offenses, assaults and minor infractions, um, or sometimes even more than minor infractions. And one of the things that we have to do is, like, the world is a behavioristic world. Like, we are using these old school methods, and so sometimes we have to learn, how can I function within those systems
Yeah.
that are not ideal.
Yeah.
Like, for even our I think it was Lucy, our first question is like, kids are going to go to prison, and prison systems are ultimately punitive.
Yeah.
But this is really about, like, again, it's that personal journey. Like, how do I change my mindset to not think punitively, but to think protectively? Right. And so I don't want to see kids go into a prison to punish them. I
Right.
want to think of it as, how do I keep everybody safe? Right. And when you start shifting your mindset to safety and away from punishment, things change. But I think one of the things, and I had it on last night, like, sometimes we're just disrupting systems, and you're stuck working within a system that isn't ideal.
But then
And
but they're going to, but in their mind, the world, they need to keep the school safe, so they don't want that child. But my sense is to protect that child by keeping them in the school, because if they're not within the school system, they won't be safe. Do you know what I mean? They're mutually
yeah,
exclusive. And so that is my dichotomy, in terms of, I'm trying to help the child, but they don't work simultaneously.
right.
And I feel
It's
so I'm on a losing wicket, really.
yeah.
Well,
It,
I think
it's
we could
it's
probably spend
frustrating.
days on that, Jane. I
Sorry?
think we
Yeah,
could spend days and days
I know.
on it. But but look, I live in Queensland in Australia, and we have a very conservative government that's just taken over from a Labor government. They have reduced the age of responsibility, criminal responsibility, from 14 to 10 years old.
We have 10.
Yes. It's just, I mean, the child's hardly got a brain at 10.
Yeah.
Well, there are some people at 30 that don't have a brain, but it's the changing. Well, the big thing, and everyone who works in this space knows what I'm talking about, is the changing of mindsets, the changing of culture.
Yeah.
But prison should be a place where those kids can heal.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's really.
Yeah. Yeah. So really and truthfully, I mean, I'm trying to change a system that can't really be changed on my own. But I mean, it's just, so it's my questions. Is it okay, before you go, just if you can give me one question, one prompt that I could focus on and develop for my panel, my exclusion panel, because this is something that I want to be impartial, obviously, for the school and the child. But what can I be focusing on, in your opinion, that could help me keep this trauma-informed line of judge, this ethic in my head? Is there anything you can give me as a prompt?
Well, Jane, actually what I'm suggesting, besides a quick prompt, is I'd like to do some more work with you online, chat away, talk a
yeah,
few things around strategies and so on. I'd love that.
Would you?
So,
How?
yes.
Oh,
yeah. I agree. I would get in on that call too. So, how about I give you and put in the chat here, and I'm putting this there for everyone. That's my email address. Just email us. I would
oh,
love to get you some resources and supports.
oh my
And
God, that would
so,
be amazing. Because
yeah, I'm happy to do that.
no, I tell you, I'm so grateful, because I crossed the board between YJS and schools, and I feel so helpless I'm a volunteer. So I have to tell you, this is the best thing for me.
Yeah, check in with us. But I also want to make sure we have time to get to these other
Sorry.
couple of
Yeah, thank you
questions.
so
So
much. That's so
feel free to
generous.
email me, and we'll definitely try to, Marg and I can like figure out a time where we could all meet. But
Oh my
there's also some questions in the chat, and then I want to get to Benny and Shelley too.
Yeah,
So
there's
Benny,
so many questions. Yeah, Bernie, do you wanna bring your question with a few minutes left?
You need to unmute,
There you
Bernie.
go. Margaret, I was very touched at the beginning of your presentation by your blessing of the land of the ancestors. And I was interested to know from your perspective the importance of ritual as opposed to just routine, the sort of the formal, intentional, spiritual component of a routine. Is that
Yes.
an element of what you want to offer to support people's development?
Look, aside from recognizing cultural differences and just look, this for starters, it's recognition of the trauma that colonization has caused. All right, so that's straight up. But I think ritual is also about the safety that goes with routines. But a ritual, like I have a ritual in the shower. It's not quite the same as
Too much information there.
acknowledgement of the country, but I think the rituals that we would have, like in a restorative, formal restorative process, there's always ritual of some sort. It's a dependable, predictable kind of thing that makes us all feel a bit safer, and that opens when we're safe and we have this sense of belonging in this little community of people, then and we end up feeling understood, and we begin to see someone else's perspective, and we develop empathy, all of that stuff in a restorative. What it does is open up the cortex for problem solving. So these rituals is a good word, and I feel very strongly about doing it here in Australia, and because I do a lot of work in New Zealand, and there are the whole Pacifica region. It's really an expectation that we do it.
I think there is a greater recognition of the heritage of ritual that exists in the variety of cultures that now occupy that space. But I go back to what you said about just greeting someone as they come into a classroom. That can be a routine, but lend it meaning and it becomes a ritual, and it has greater impact then.
Absolutely, and it's transformational, not transactional. It's also part of checking on a kid's state of regulation. But the thing about even greeting Bernie is about saying their name, because there is, and making sure you pronounce it properly, that there are too many kids whose name is never spoken by an adult during the course of a school day, and that is appalling. And to look at that child, and in that moment, which we call a touch moment, that they know for that nanosecond that they are the center of our universe. That's what I mean by greeting. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm afraid I think we're just about to run out of time, which is a shame, because we haven't come to Shelley, and there's loads of questions in the chat as well. But perhaps we can pick up some of those at a future event. One not so much a question, but more a comment from Charlotte here at the end of the chat, saying, please can your next book be about being a trauma-informed and relational parent? And I would second that, because I would love to hear about that. We did a podcast, I think, last year, the year before, on relational parenting and restorative parenting. And there's so much there that we can unpack that relates very much to this in terms of relationships with children and how we sort of guide them and raise them in the world. So anyway, if you need an idea for another book, great one from Charlotte.
It's just how we are, Joy, as parents. And so if I knew what I know now when I was raising two adolescent boys who were, something of a trial. They've turned out all right now, but it was touch and go there for a while. But I would have been a different parent. I would have been a different sibling to my brothers and sisters. I would have been different to my own mum and dad
Yeah.
had I known this stuff, but we didn't, and we muddled along.
Yeah.
So I can't beat myself up about that, but the
Yeah.
rules of engagement around relational neurobiology totally apply to raising our children in our homes.
Yeah. I'm just going to pop in the chat this link to the evaluation and feedback form, because I'd love to have people's feedback from today's event, so that we can make good events in the future. So if you could click that link, and before it disappears when we all leave, then it'll be open in your browser and you can fill that in. I'd really appreciate it if you could do that. I'm so sorry we've run out of time.
Can I just say, Joy,
Yeah.
Shelley, if you have a question and anyone else, please just email both of us.
Yeah, totally.
I feel
Yes.
bad because there were so many amazing questions that I personally would have loved to explore more, but I really want to respect everyone's time today, not least Marg and Joe. So thank you so much for taking your time with us today. I will share a link to this recording next week, and some other links to other resources. So it probably won't be till early next week, but do keep an eye out for that, and hopefully we can continue to have some of these discussions in future in different formats and contexts. And thank you again so much for being with us here today. Really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you.